The basic idea of karma has been drilled into our moral lexicon since we were children. Negative actions elicit negative consequences, and vice versa with the positive. Whether you believe it's a spiritual thing or a domino thing, you can't deny it's definitely a thing. This idea of karma is one of the central themes in the 1999 iconic bop of a movie, The Mummy. But not in a way you'd expect from a film that seems to hang its hat on.
It's a lot of CG work. It's not a guy wrapped in bandages.
I don't want this to be like a mummy movie like we've seen in the past with a shuffling guy in bandages.
It's guys wrapped in bandages.
He couldn't be wrapped up in bandages.
The creature, like I said, he's not a guy wrapped in bandages.
The Mummy, a film set to bring new life to the 1932 Boris Karloff mummy movie, uses archetypal yet quirky characters and fun plot points to unearth a unique perspective on morality, consequence, and the nature of karma. Or at least that's how I interpreted the movie. While the commentary may appear subtle or even hidden behind the mask of fun adventure and how sexy Brendan Fraser looks, the theme is front and center. 3 separate characters say it out loud at 3 separate points in the movie. Almost like the writer and director Stephen Sommers is reminding us of what we should be paying attention to throughout.
We're gonna get yours, Betty! You hear me?
You know, nasty little fellows such as yourself always get their comeuppance.
They do?
Oh yes. Always.
These clips all have one thing in common outside of alluding to the idea of karma. They're all in reference to Benny, Emotep's shifty sidekick and the ex-friend of our hero Rick O'Connell. Because Benny is the one person characters straight out yell the theme to, I feel he's our baseline for Sommers' idea of karma. Not necessarily a linear bad begets bad mentality, but that if you engage in enough horrible activity, eventually something you do will screw you over. From Benny's introduction running from a battle in Hamunaptra and shutting O'Connell out of the temple when he was being chased by warriors with weapons, to helping Emotep capture Evelyn to bring back a Noxuna moon. Benny was in it for himself, constantly trying to save his own skin and secure his place in the New World Order.
What the hell you doing with this creep, huh, Benny?
It is better to be the right hand of the devil than in his path. As long as I serve him, I am immune.
His character arc follows a standard karmic structure. Benny does bad things. Benny gets eaten alive by scarab beetles.
Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme.
But if you look in between the lines, Benny also has the most charmed story out of everyone in the film. He manages to avoid fighting and survives at Hamunaptra. He ran away from opening the Anubis chest before he could be cursed. He didn't have to run from or fear the title monster at any point. He even had ample opportunity to run away with a lot of gold while Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan were getting their asses handed to them by Emotep. Despite how selfish Benny was, he had a chance at a happy ending. Benny wasn't taken down by some magical or external force. It was his own hubris that kept him going inside the temple to steal gold, which eventually caused him to accidentally pull the lever that led to him being trapped inside the temple, sealing his fate. He made a lot of bad decisions, which means there was a high probability one of them would catch up to him. He was an evil character that got what was coming. A simple and straightforward example of karma. This idea of
We're gonna get yours, Betty!
gets a little fuzzy when looking at the other characters, namely the Americans. Every time I've watched The Mummy, which is a lot, I've felt bad about how it ended for the Americans. You know, with Emotep stealing their vital organs and such. They weren't bad people. They teamed up with Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan. They warned them when bad things were coming as opposed to leaving them dry. They were courteous and civil. They weren't perfect, but they didn't deserve what happened to them. If anything, they were equally as jerkish as our main group of heroes. That's right, Brendan and friends weren't exactly that amazing either. They're actually kind of assholes.
That's why I like this movie, is because it's all the characters to one degree or another are terrible people.
Yes.
Jonathan was a thief. Rick kissed Evelyn when she didn't want it and then stole tools from the Americans to give to her. Even Evelyn, our approximation for kind-heartedness in the film, was willing to let people shoot each other to keep the toolkit she knew Rick stole for her, and she took the Book of the Dead from the Americans. The only reason the Americans were cursed to suffer the worst fate in the movie was because they won the right to open the chest that Brendan and his crew were also vying to open. Oh, and side note, for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to our main heroes as the British because it's easier to track. Anyway, given the American and British sides were equally flawed, what does the Mummy say about morality if one group was brutally murdered and the other got away scot-free? Where's the karma in that? Well, besides factoring in the role of luck when it comes to cause and effect, I think the reason the Americans died and the British were fine harkens back to the original meaning of the term karma. Not the colloquial one I established in the beginning of the video, but the traditional Buddhist one. While our standard definition of karma relating to cause and effect is technically true, it neglects a key aspect of the term: volition, or someone's will to do something and the motivation behind an act. It's not that doing something bad will lead to bad karma. It's that an action motivated by ill intent leads to negative outcomes. Think Aladdin and how he was a thief, but he was a thief with good intentions. So if we look at each group as a singular individual and consider this definition when comparing the motivations of all parties involved, the Americans, British, and Benny, you can see that the Americans actually have more in common with Benny, where they were both solely motivated by greed. The promise of treasure and money brought the Americans and Benny to Hamunaptra. But with the British, our heroes, each member had a different reason to embark on this adventure. Yes, Jonathan went for gold, but Evelyn was in it for knowledge, and Rick out of loyalty and obligation. They could have stood their ground against the Americans, and two things would have happened. They would have either been shot, or won the ability to open the statue where they would have been dissolved by salt acid before getting to the chest. But because Evelyn was fueled by knowledge and information as opposed to this fervent need for money, she used her reasoning to get her crew to dig in a different location. And it's not just Evelyn's logic that saved the British. Each character's distinct motivations kept the others alive on several occasions. Rick's obligation had him rush in and rescue people multiple times when he would have otherwise left. Jonathan's greed was an asset when he continually kept track of the key, and was weaselly enough to keep out of major battles so he could stay alive to help in a more involved way during the final minutes of the Emotep battle. But even with each character acting out of specific drivers, they all have a touch of curiosity, loyalty, and even greed, which benefits them throughout the movie. By looking at the variety of motivations in the British group and their endings compared to the Americans and other characters, the message of the film as it relates to
We're gonna get yours, Betty!
becomes more three-dimensional. I think the film is saying that greed and selfishness as a motivating factor is not inherently bad, but being motivated by a singular pursuit, whether it's classified as positive or negative, will most likely lead to less than ideal results. If you're too focused on one thing, it can blind you from the full picture and lead you to make uninformed or biased decisions. The actions that produce the best outcomes are the ones fueled by a combination of motivations and allegiances outside yourself. Despite the British being slightly greedy, it was their selflessness, loyalty, and pursuit of something pure that helped them survive. There's a ton of interesting examples in the movie that demonstrate this thematic theory incorporating motivation, but I'll only touch on two that specifically piqued my interest. The first example is a brief look at the Warden and Jonathan. Both characters were fairly similar in their motivations that greed and wealth brought them to Hamunaptra.
2 questions. Who the hell was Settled first, and was he rich?
I'm here to protect my investment. Thank you very much.
Additionally, they were both involved in the same life-threatening situations because of their greed that resulted in different outcomes. At 2 separate points in the movie, both Jonathan and the Warden pick up what appears to be a sculpture of a scarab beetle off a wall. The scarab emerges from its casing and crawls inside their skin, determined to eat their brains. With the Warden, his compulsion to collect the treasure he was promised isolated him from the group, which means that no one was around to help him as he was eaten alive. However, in Jonathan's case, he wasn't exclusively looking for treasure. He found the beetle when he was on a mission to save his sister with Rick and Ardith. Therefore, he had Rick around to pull the beetle out of his arm and save him. The difference between life and death for the Warden and Jonathan were the people they surrounded or didn't surround themselves with, and the motivations for being in a situation that would allow them to interact with a scarab in the first place, subsequently resulting in different karmic endings.
Many men have wasted their lives in the foolish pursuit of Hamunaptra. Most have never returned.
Come, come! Step over the threshold.
Now, the second example that probably best illustrates this need for varied motivations when looking at outcomes is the scene when the British have defeated Imhotep and Hamunaptra starts collapsing around them. As the group attempts to escape the temple, each member has a moment where they pause for a little too long, ignoring the immediate danger because they're distracted by something they want, ultimately representing their defining motivation. First, Evelyn stops to mourn the loss of the Book of Life that was thrown into the gross body water. And yes, I do mean body water, not body of water. But Rick and Jonathan pull her away and make her keep running. Then, Jonathan stops in the treasure room, complaining about how they just can't leave all this gold in a crumbling city. But, yet again, Rick and Evelyn yank him out. Both of them were about to be crushed because of their actions fueled by a singular cause. Evelyn and her need for knowledge, aka the book, and Jonathan and his need for wealth, the gold. Again, if we look at the entire group as an individual with each person contributing a motivation, then we can see that their varied wants and desires help them survive as a whole. They weren't just pushed by greed or wealth, but a combination of things that allowed each to make holistic decisions. But what about Rick, aka O'Connell? He also had this moment of pause, but it was slightly different from Evelyn's or Jonathan's. He didn't stop for an object, but to save Benny from being trapped inside the ruins. And Rick didn't leave because he was pulled out. He leaves because Benny is blocked off by the door. As I said before, Rick's main motivation is loyalty and obligation. And this reason to stay behind, helping someone, falls in line with that. Benny and Rick might not have been friends, but they had a history and camaraderie.
Think of my children.
You don't have any children.
Someday I might.
Shut up.
But while Rick and Benny might have had similar backgrounds, they've accumulated different karma on each end of the morality spectrum. And this scene is where that karmic buildup comes in handy. Benny did terrible things and aligned himself with a literal monster. So fittingly, he was trapped in a cave and was eaten alive by scarab beetles, surrounded by the wealth he pined over throughout the movie. Rick, on the other hand, was decent and protected people, even the ones he wasn't fond of. Therefore, the door closing on Benny before Hamunaptra collapsed could also be seen as a positive for Rick. Rick didn't leave because he was being pulled out by his friends. He left because Benny was inescapably shut in just in time for O'Connell to realize it was hopeless, run out, and ride off into the sunset with the girl he loved and a bag of gold Benny had stolen. Benny had to die and be punished for his actions for O'Connell to live and be rewarded. This small scene might seem like the last hurrah of an action-packed adventure, but it's a poignant moment that captures the underlying theme of the film while reflecting its adrenaline-fueled and quirky tone. It's a beautiful and calculated dance of volition and reaction, carefully balancing narrative and suspense while subtly revealing a nuanced perspective on morality and consequence. Much like Sommer's main intention for this film, to update the 1932 Mummy for modern audiences, this movie took the simple idea of karma we grew up with and adapted it to be applicable now. As someone who grew up with the 1999 Mummy as one of her foundational building blocks, I've come to learn that this film is a charming guilt trip, using swashbuckling action and lighthearted humor to remind us that,
you know, nasty little fellows such as yourself always get their comeuppance. Always.
And those are my thoughts on The Mummy. At this point, I'd like to thank my patrons Matt David, Patrick, Jessica Lee, Eric Brown. Thank you guys so much for the support, I really appreciate it. If you, the viewer, also want to support my channel, you can subscribe, like this video, and/or donate to my Patreon. The link is in the description below. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.